Hello friends, welcome back to Aunt Debbie's Boutique. This is day 3 in our star quilt tutorials, and the quilt that we are making is the Corner Star by Missouri Star Quilt Company. And I've made a couple of blocks. So far, that was just for my benefit to know what we're doing. But on our first day, we made all of these flying geese. There's half of them are navy and half of them are red. And then we put them together with some other blocks to make the strip that goes across the top and across the bottom. So there's 2 of those strips, here and here, on each of them. Then on the next video, we learned how to make these square in a square blocks, and we used a bunch of them and put them together with some more of our flying geese and our just our corner squares. What we made was this row on each of them and this row. So the only row we have left to do is the center row. And I have my fabrics divided up so that the reds are on one side and the navies are the other. And these are the blocks I want to use for the centers on the reds, and these are the blocks I want to use for the centers on the navies. So this last strip, we're going to use up the rest of our square in a squares, and we're going to use a center block and then 2 of these background rectangles on the ends. So what we're going to have is a square and a square surrounded by, just kind of move this over, with our center square in the middle, and then our background rectangles on the end. So this is our center strip. Then I'll see if you can envision this with all this clutter on here. But it's going to be in the middle of these strips we sewed last time. So if you haven't watched those videos, you might want to go back and watch them. I apologize, the first one wasn't labeled very well. I called it Streamlining Your Quilt Construction, because that's what I've been trying to teach with this quilt. But a lot of people were confused and didn't know it was the first step in the star quilt. So I may go back and change the thumbnail on that and see if, I can't change the name of the video at this point, but I can change the thumbnail. Okay, so I'm going to streamline these by, I think the first thing I'm going to do is just sandwich this in between these 2. So I will take this stack and this stack over to my sewing machine, and I'll pick up one of these, sew this on one side, and do that for all of these squares. Then I'll come back and sew this one on the other side, and then I'll come back and sew on the end pieces. So if you want to watch me, maybe it will make a little more sense if I didn't explain it well. Okay, let's go to the sewing machine. right, I've sewn up all of the center strips, and I timed it. It took all of 13 minutes to do 8 of these center strips. I am finding that this is a very beginner-friendly pattern, in that the only two blocks you need to learn how to do is the flying geese and the square, and I think they're both simple enough for a beginner. And the rest of it just sews up so quickly, and yet the final pattern looks so complicated. So if you're a beginner and you want to impress your friends and family, this would be a good one to try. Okay, now I want to iron these away from the square in a square. And if you're new to my channel, I'm going to reiterate something that I have talked about a lot, and that is why we iron the seam to one side instead of ironing it open. The reason for that is, if we were to iron this open, and then a pressure was applied to this seam, it could come unsewn real easily, because it's just, when you tug on it, that's just the seam there holding it together. But when they're ironed to one side and you try to tug on that, it's stronger. It won't come, especially after it's been quilted on top of that. So we do that to give it strength, give our quilt strength. Cut off all these beginning threads. And we try to iron them so that different directions, when they're going to be stitched, two seams are going to be stitched together so that they nest and we have less bulk. And I'll show you that here in just a minute if that doesn't make sense to you. But the reason we want our back to look as nice as it can and everything ironed in the right directions is, for one thing, it makes quilting it easier, and for another, you don't have places where there's extra bulk, and so the quilt doesn't get bunchy in the corners or on the seams. Now, I'm a firm believer in a steam iron because it just lays everything so flat and nice, but there are people who will not use a steam iron. They swear by only a dry iron because they think a steam iron can distort your blocks and that it can shrink your fabric if you haven't pre-washed it, or sometimes even when you have. I've never had problems like that. And I just think my blocks lay much nicer if I use a little steam on them. Now, you don't want to get them completely wet and then tug on them so they get out of shape. But as long as you're gentle with them, I just think this works much nicer. And there are people who are adamant on both sides of the fence. So it's a personal preference, and you're just going to have to decide for yourself which way you like to do it. Okay, we've got 2 more. And this will be all of the navy blue squares. This quilt, if you'll notice, has 2 colorways. This one's a blue and a gold star. Mine is a blue and a red. And so that 13 minutes that it took me to make all the center strips was just for the blue side. So take another 13 minutes to do the red side. Okay, now that we have, that didn't take long at all. Now let's try putting together a block. I'm going to lay all the red stuff to the side so we can concentrate on the blue ones. Okay, we know we need one of these at the top and one at the bottom. Then we need one of these. We made 2 blocks exactly alike, 2 strips in our last video. And we want those at the top and the bottom. And then we need one of our center blocks that we just completed. Let's see. How about that one? I've only got the choice of red or orange, and there's lots of little orange flowers in there, so I think I'm going to use that. Now, because of the way we ironed everything, as we put our blocks together, our seams are, as we sew the strip units together to make our block, the seams should be going, when they meet up like this, one is facing this direction and one that direction. And we want them to nest together right there so that the seam is literally on top of the other seam. And can you see that the seam allowance is going the opposite direction? That helps it not be so bulky. If you want to pin these seams, you can. I seem to have better luck myself just straightening them up as I go and feeling them than pinning them. But every time I say that on camera, I make a liar out of myself because I'll mess one up. But I mostly prefer to just start sewing, and then as I get too close to a seam, making sure it's nesting properly. But I'll go ahead and pin this one. So what I'm going to do is just sew each row and add the next row. So once I sew this one, I'll grab this one and right sides together, sew it, and our seam should be going different directions. Then this one, then this one. And that will put our final block together. So let's take this over to, I'm going to stack them like this so I know the right order. Let's take this over to the sewing machine and put our block together. we've got our block together and we just need to iron these seams now. And if when you're putting yours together, a piece seems shorter or longer than the other side, sometimes you have to stretch just a little bit, pull it a little bit tight, making sure you hold the seams together to make it all fit. You don't want to have to stretch or squeeze it a whole lot, but a little bit. Let's look at our corners. They all look pretty good. Yeah, I'll keep those. Those look good. Now, if your corners don't meet good, you have two options. If it bothers you a lot, take it out and fix it, because you'll never be happy with that quilt. If it doesn't bother you, which I'm not a person that bothers a whole lot, don't worry about it. Nobody's going to see it but you. Or nobody's going to notice it but you. Okay, then we need to iron these seams. And you can iron these any direction you want. Because from this point on, they're not going to be crossing seams with another seam. So I'm just ironing them all the same direction here. Try not to mess up what was ironed before. Sometimes I do. And then give it a good steam iron so it lays nice and flat. Okay, there is our block. Here's one of the red ones that I put together. And I think they're going to look real pretty next to each other. There's going to be some sashing. And we'll do that next time. So I'm going to go put together the rest of my blocks. As you can see, they didn't take very long because we'd already assembled all the strips except this one. So if you're sewing along with me, get your blocks done, and on the next video I will show you them all laid out so you can see all the blocks, and we'll talk about how to do the sashing and finish up our quilt top. So that will be the last one in the series. I appreciate each and every one of you that have watched this. If you could, please like, subscribe, share, or comment. Anything that you can do helps the magic YouTube algorithms, and it helps me to bring more videos to you. I think the next quilt we'll work on after we finish this one will be a quilt of valor. So if you want to learn how to make those, they have some specific rules, and we'll go over that too. Okay, thanks for joining me, and excuse my barking dog. I'm sorry. But thanks for joining me, and I hope to see you next time. Remember, whatever you do, even if it's just sewing quilt blocks, do it to the glory of the Lord. Thank you.